Merci. Yes? Okay, let's go. So, hello everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us today. We are going to embark on the journey of the role of boards. For the first time at ChangeNOW, we did organize a specific programs for board members. And we have today with us 150 international board members from around the world that are eager to move the needle. We know that time is about action, right? We are at the crossroads, and action speaks louder than words. But the reality is that change is never easy. And we are all conscious about the pivotal roles of boards. But today, 70% of board members do not feel very effective when it comes to integrated sustainability into corporate strategy and governance. So I'm very happy and grateful to welcome visionary board leaders to share with us their journey and to help us navigate. So for our first speaker, let me invite somebody that has always been a true inspiration to me, a visionary leader, the first CEO that integrated sustainability at the very core of the strategy. Today, a business campaigner and the author of Net Positive. Warm welcome to Paul Polman. Welcome, Paul. Please take a seat. Thank you, Paul. We feel so lucky to have you.
No, thanks for having me in this beautiful setting.
It's amazing,
It's hard
right?
to look this way when you have this view. Tough to concentrate. So this is the result of ESG.
Too much skiing, maybe.
Especially dangerous skiing.
I cannot cross my legs like you. Okay. But anyway, thank you for being here. As you are, for me, the true rock star of impact. So thank you for sharing your experience. And I don't know how many of you have already read the book of Paul, Net Positive.
That's more hands than we sold copies. A little bit suspicious.
So maybe can you share with us, Paul, a little bit about your theory of change about net positive, but what does it really take to be a net positive board?
Yeah, so we can talk that a little bit. The reason we wrote the book, by the way, and it still is the second best-selling book for Harvard, and we were number 3 on the Thinkers 50, so it really resonates with people very practically. What we wanted to achieve is a mindset change, and I think it's the same for boards, if I may keep it simple. Most people are in the CSR space, and you see that here as well. It's really about the way we look at solutions is to be less bad, you know. I want to emit less carbon. I want to cut down less trees. I want to put less plastics in the ocean. But the reality is, if you look at Johan Rockström's 9 planetary boundaries, 6 we've already passed. We're on the way to passing 8 of them. We're well beyond the thing to do less bad. We really need to start thinking regenerative, restorative, reparative. That's the essence of the book, and that's really what we need to think about. I always, it's probably not a good comparison, but I used to murder 10 people, I'm a good murderer. Now I only murder 5 people, I'm not a better murderer. So you need to really have companies think about how can they improve the state of the world. And in the book we just ask ourselves 2 very simple questions. How can you profit from solving the world's problems, not creating them? And is the world better off because your company is in it or not? Now you go to boards very quickly. The way that we measure, most of the boards, 95% of the boards now issue sustainability reports. Everybody uses the word, you know, it's like we put .com behind it, we put AI behind it, now you put sustainability behind it, and you're sort of in fashion. But if you look at those reports and the way we judge boards right now, it's basically around, do you have a board committee on sustainability? Do you issue a sustainability report? Sometimes, if you're lucky, which is the case for about 15% of CEOs, is compensation one way or another linked to ESG. But these are measures really that have, have run out of its time.
This is kind of hygiene, no?
It's less than hygiene, in my opinion, on where we are today. So what you really need is boards that understand that they need to be proactive versus reactive, that they need to think regenerative versus just being simply less bad. And that takes courage. It takes a different board. And we just don't have enough of those at the moment.
So how do you make this shift happen? How do you make a board become more proactive?
Well, first and most importantly, you have to get the right board members. You have to spend really a lot of time on that. When I came to Unilever, we had a board that was, I was explained that was very diverse. We had 6 white guys from the Netherlands and 6 white guys from the UK, and boy, could they disagree. So the definition of diversity was kind of narrowly defined. And so the first thing I did was really ensure that was my only request, really, that we get a new board there. Not that these people were bad, but they had grown up in a different time, So get a board there that better reflected the strategy of what we were going to execute. So we ended up being the first fully diverse board. We had 2 people from Africa, 2 people from the Far East, the first black woman that went to Harvard and all the other things. So it was a very diverse board, and the richness was in its diversity. But we also recognize, and that is for most companies the case, is that you're on a path that nobody else has been on. Any company now that is on the leading edge, which is the right place to be, I would argue, is really trotting a path that nobody else has done. And for board members, that's equally unsettling. So finding the right board members that have passion, that reflect the knowledge that you need, that have a certain level of diversity, is even more important now than ever. And it's a good thing that about 46% of the new board appointments in the US and Europe now are people of diversity or people of color. And so the changes are starting to happen, but it's still at a scale that is way below what we actually need.
So it's started by people, and then how do you make the board effective? As we had the conversation downstairs with some board members, how do you make it effective to really move the needle, especially in your experience with pioneer boards?
Yeah. So the challenge is that most boards, I'm on 3 boards myself right now, and that's the maximum I can handle with all the other things I'm working on. But it's hard, the way that compliance is thrown at you, the way that the economy puts challenges on companies, the way that technology is evolving and disrupting every business model that you look at, takes a lot of time from boards. And most of these boards will say we're in the reactive mode, We're spending a lot of time on things that are forced upon us to do that. And they don't have the breathing room to do what really counts. Obviously, boards need to look at the financials of a company, succession, risk management, these things always stay. But increasingly what is important is how do you embed sustainability at the core of your organization? How do you think about the world around you and move from the single-minded focus, which still most boards are on, of the shareholder to the multiple stakeholders? How do you get into deeper understanding of companies' cultures and what type of CEOs you need as to run these companies? So these fundamental questions are often, we don't have time to really treat them at the board level. So you need to create time. It's very important what committees and what work you do in committees and how you spend your time together and where you spend your time on, like on anything else. So at Unilever, for example, we really limited the compulsory parts to an hour and a half, 2 hours. Made the board meetings 2 days instead of 1 day. But then the brilliant thing was, I think, if I look back, was that things were going so fast that we had to educate ourselves. So I thought we might as well educate ourselves at the same time as we educate the board. So then you're on the same journey. So we offered the board these learning sessions the day before the board meetings. And we said it's obviously not compulsory. You can come if you want to or not. And we would talk in those times, the discussions might seem obvious now, but we would talk circularity, we would talk human rights, We would talk sustainable development goals. We could take any of these topics and really dive deeper into it. And what we found was 100% attendance all the time, because people like to educate themselves and grow and be curious and be part of that. So this joint development of a board is very important. The average age of a board right now is 63 years old. There's nothing wrong with that. You have to be 80 nowadays to be elected president. but the average age is, and 1 in 5 board members is above 75 years old. So these are wonderful people without any doubt, but they grew up in a different time, you know. They got tested under different challenges than what is needed now. So you need to change that. And, you know, you still have more than half the board that thinks that everybody thinks sustainability is important because it's a bad thing to say it's not important. But if you actually look at the boards, less than half really discuss how it affects the strategy of the board. So the first thing you really have to do is get people that are reflective of society, that understand some of these have some of these domain knowledge, be it AI, be it sustainability, be it climate change. And there are very few right now on boards that are really up to that level, if I may be honest.
I'm impressed. I didn't know actually that you brought the day before your board members to really learn and take them on this learning journey together. I have another question also. I'm curious about understanding also, because you always say that it needs to be part of your strategy, of your question, etc. Does it mean that you didn't delegate, if I may say, the board didn't delegate sustainability to a specific committee? It was part of the core of the board agenda, or how did it work?
Yeah, even in the company itself, I already felt from the start that if it becomes your strategy, then it becomes everybody's responsibility. So whilst you might have a small sustainability department that is more of an enabling department, and there might be some corporate issues that you want to deal with, you know, you probably want one strategy on human rights in your value chain. You probably want one strategy coordinated on working with governments and government relations. So there are some things that you might put in a corporate shell if you want to, but we never, in Unilever, never had more than 15, 20 people working in that department. And that was basically focused, by the way, on creating these broader partnerships to make things happen. So how could we work effectively, let's say, on sanitation with USAID or the Gates Foundation or DFID or other things. So we did that part corporately, but very much embedded into the business units, embedded into the strategy is absolutely important. So for the board, I think we have discovered, I think the boards that are a little bit ahead of others, that a separate sustainable or sustainability or corporate reputation, usually they go together. Usually they put you know, the issues of compensation and remuneration in that same committee. Otherwise, they don't have anything to do because we don't talk so much about sustainability yet. So they put it all together in sort of a committee and really don't bother us, keep the issues away from the board. Is not really the right approach. So in every committee that you have, you need to embed that. I would argue, actually, if you're in the finance committee, I chair some of the audit committees in different foundations I'm in and one board. That's probably smack in the middle if you don't think about climate risk, for example, now, or risks of human rights violations in your value chain. You know, you're not doing your job anymore, even as a finance person on the board.
Based on your experience also, when you shift purpose into practice, when you bring it to core, we understand, based on what you just explained, that it's all about the right people, the learning journey altogether. Anything that you can share with us from your experience where you have seen your board or another board where you have contributed shifting, where you have seen this shift happen based on also this collective mindset? Any specific moment that you would like to share with us?
Well, I'm a very tactile person, so I never liked to be in the office. I probably was only 15, 20% in the office, because I figured out a long time ago that the consumers or the citizens of the world that we were trying to deal with were not living in my office, so it's better to take them out. And it's a very important thing to do the same with the board. We only had one board meeting, which was the AGM, the official one, if you want to, that we would have in the office, and the rest we really had in different places in the world. So bringing the board to what you're trying to do, showing them what the impacts of your brands are, bringing them to the other stakeholders. You know, they're all familiar with the shareholders, And even boards now, we have to be careful, even boards that say we have multi-stakeholder models, that as soon as the pressure is there, including in the company I was running, as soon as the pressure is there, they tend to gravitate back towards the shareholder. So you have to work hard, I think, very hard on board members to make them understand that it's these multiple stakeholders actually that, you know, that make the company's success longer term. And that's not easily understood. We have more data now that would support us if we would look at it and bother understanding it, but it's still not well understood by most of them. You know, you look at an example of Boeing, it's an outright tragedy. In fact, what is a bigger tragedy, I saw yesterday on one of these channels, someone sent me some piece of information that some people of certain political color in the US are convinced that Boeing went off the rails because they spent too much time on D&I. And that sustainability had become a word that was in the company. And this was a plot sponsored by China to be sure that the US airline industry would be in decline whilst other parts of the world would benefit. So those are the type of elements you're up against in some of these things. But you look at the Boeing case, it's an outright tragedy of talking the talk but not walking the walk. And the same would be for GE or Wells Fargo or many others. The graveyard of dinosaurs is full of companies that were just catering to the shareholder and on. So the other thing that's important is that you make the board part of a strategy to attract the right shareholders. I've always felt that with the tenure of CEOs now less than 5 years, most of them tend to dance to the tunes of the current shareholders. I find that very dangerous because if you change your strategies, it's very important that you look at shareholders that support your strategy. And because the rest is a financial game. They're so far removed from the actual company, they've become not shareholders. Frankly, they've become speculators. So,
how do you make the board come your way? I mean, come your way and embrace this journey and invite the relevant shareholder. That's not an easy one.
No, it's not an easy one, but a very rewarding one if you could do that. I think when we got this attack from Kraft Heinz, for example, which was purely driven by shareholder primacy focus and greed, to be honest, didn't make any strategic sense. The board felt more comfortable because of the right support that they got or that they felt from a changed shareholder base. It took us about 5 years to show that our top 10 shareholders had actually significantly increased their holdings. The top 100 shareholders had doubled the holdings in the company. And we were actively not only working our relationships with them, but actually actively seeking them paid off, in my opinion.
There was a point that was discussed actually in the discussion with the board members previously, that it's quite challenging to be on the market and to drive a sustainable business or sustainability at the core of business versus in family-owned business or in a more stabilized governance. Can you elaborate on that?
It's not actually true. If you look at family businesses, are they more sustainable or less sustainable than publicly traded companies? There's no real evidence. Despite the interest that you might expect from family-owned companies that they want to preserve their capital. And yes, they do intend to invest more in capital spend, for example, than publicly traded companies. But the disclosure requirements of publicly traded companies are significantly higher than private. And there is something about disclosure that drives behavior. You just don't want to be publicly called out. So you actually see quite a lot of public companies setting the pace versus private companies. They tend to be a little smaller, perhaps with a few exceptions, and they tend to stay under the radar screen. Like in any of these stories, there are exceptions on both sides of that equation. But broadly, I would not say privately owned companies, because they don't have the pressure of the shareholders, are able to behave better. No, it's not the case. The other thing is a misconception about the shareholders. There's this misconception that all the problems that we have is because of this short-termism and shareholder primacy. There is a big enough group in the shareholder base that actually thinks quite differently. There are many of the pension funds and institutional investors that understand that they need a decent return to guarantee a retirement of the people that they represent, but they also understand that that needs to happen in a world that they can retire in. And some of these funds have become so big, like BlackRock, for example, or State Street, Fidelity, Vanguard, the Japanese investment fund that Hero used to run. They've become so big that actually stock picking doesn't make sense for them anymore. Their main interest is to be sure that these overall economies work. So they've become your biggest allies if you really spend time with them.
We see we have a lady from Bloomberg also afterwards, so we'll have more interest in that. And maybe because it says, and you are all about, you know, courageous leadership, driving, being the pioneer in business as a force for good. What does it really take as a leader, as a board member, to move the needle?
So you look at the characteristics of what we would call a net positive company, and our title, our subtitle of the book is How Courageous Companies Thrive by Giving More Than They Take. But a courageous company is made up of courageous leaders, and the board is part of that leadership in the broader sense. So these are people that understand it's better, as I always say, it's better to make the dust than eat the dust. So these are people that see the writing on the wall, they see what's happening, and they want to be leaders in positioning their companies for a future that is more desirable, more equitable, more sustainable. And so these are leaders that understand that they have to take responsibility for their total impact in the world. It's very painful. It's like going to the dentist if you talk in some companies scope 3, or, you know, you saw Texas the other day had the World Petrol Conference of demons now nearly, but all of them made statements that scope 3 is not their responsibility, and yet you know that 80–90% of the emissions are there. So courageous board members say, what's our total impact in the world and what should we do about that? Courageous board members will discuss what the targets are that need to be set based on science, not just targets that they can get away with. 80–90% of companies actually play not to lose versus playing to win. There are very few companies still today that really have made the science-based targets, the 2030 targets, and everybody sort of talks about 2050 as if when 2050 comes, all companies all of a sudden will be net zero. I mean, it's a ridiculous idea even. So why not, depends on the industry you're in, be a little bit more progressive and think about them. They are people that think about the planetary boundaries, not only climate change or, you know. I talk to a lot of boards. We've set up this Valuable 500 with Caroline Casey, which I chair, which basically tries to get companies to take on more people with disability. 1.3 billion people in the world, 15% of the world's population has disabilities, but very few are represented at board level. I talk to some of the best and brightest CEOs, and they say, no, this is the year of George Floyd. I need to fix this racial thing. Or I still am working on this diversity stuff. I don't know what it really is, but I'm still working it. So I can't do all these things at the same time. So if you don't look at it holistically, I think you will always be sub-optimizing. So net positive boards, full responsibility of their total impact, targets in line with science, understanding the importance of the multiple stakeholders versus only the shareholders, forging the broader partnerships. I mean, that's what you see here now at ChangeNOW, that these issues are now at such an extent that we need to solve them with broader partnerships, and they're willing to expose themselves to a certain extent to embark on these partnerships. And then if you go to the highest level of net positive, are actually companies that actively are still willing to work with NGOs, civil society, governments to drive the broader systems changes. Only 6% of the CEOs in the US go to Washington. I understand that. You have to, if you're suicidal, don't go to Brussels or Washington. But only 6% go. And the ones that go are actually going to what I call lobby. You know, there's $3.5 billion of lobbying in the US from businesses to just try to get the laws written in their advantage. And it's happening as we sit here. Or if they're even more chicken, they use their trade associations to do the work for them. But what about positive advocacy? What about going together like we did with the nature law or the circular economy law or the Green Deal? You know, not that I'm different than others, but I never go to Brussels to ask something. If I ask something, I ask, how can I help? but never ask something for my company. Because we should just focus on being sure that we create the right economies to thrive in and for our companies to compete in. And that's probably a bigger thing than our own small self-interest.
How can we help? How can we serve? So maybe given your insights about what it takes really to be a net positive board, a question to you is, how confident are you in the board ability to become net positive? How confident are you for board to make that shift?
Well, it's not easy to make that shift, so we should just recognize that. There's a lot of pressure on the boards, and there's a lot of hurdles out there. You know, the political will is missing right now. Some technologies are missing. Then there are pushback that are enormous around ESG that has become you know, politically hijacked, if you want to. Some of the changes that need to happen, the citizens of this world are not yet fully ready for it. So, but a good board is able to deal with those uncertainties. A good board is able to look at these trade-offs. A good board is able to make decisions on these most important areas, especially when it concerns the future of humanity. So it's not that they make the right or wrong decisions, because you never know without the benefit of hindsight. It's not that there aren't any trade-offs and choices to be made. The most important thing is that you're willing to embark on that journey and have these discussions and have a board that is diversified enough to bring the different perspectives there. And in that sense, we're seeing improvements, but we're far, the statistics show that we're far from where we need to be. There's no question about it. The boards, I think right now still, and I have to be careful how I express it with my Dutch directness, but I think there are more boards that are holding back this transition than accelerating this transition. And that's not a good thing.
So one call to action to this amazing crowd of change makers was numerous of them being board members. What would be your call to action?
My call to action is if you don't believe in the acceleration that needs to happen in your companies and want to play it safe, step aside and let someone else be on the boards, because we desperately need that. You know, we need younger people on the boards. We need broader representation on the boards. And boards are cushy things for many people. They sort of see that as a birthright after a brilliant career. And they're overpaid for the work they're doing. So I understand that, but we really need, the best thing you can do is step aside or become that courageous board member where you actively help these companies transform. Time to make the dust instead of eat the dust. That's how we started.
Paul.
Thank you.
Courage is the strength of heart, the fortitude that enables you to take the right decision in challenging moments. Thank you so much for being such a courageous leader. Thank you. Well, what a start. So, in French, we say, appelle un joker or call a friend, phone a friend, I believe that's the English expression. When we were preparing the session, of course, I'm very, and the one that knows me knows that I'm very eager to have conversation with the ones that are at the forefront, the pioneers of the world, because I learned so much about them, as we've just seen with Paul right now. But there is another one that I want to share with you. Our second guest is a visionary leader that really has redefined business relationship with nature. In a world where urgent action matters, we need also courage, as Paul just stated, but also innovative practices. And Simeon Rose is this type of leader. In 2022, he made history in the world by appointing Mother Nature in the boardroom. This bold move was not just symbolic. It was the first step of a fundamental new standard when it comes to corporate stewardship. Please join me in welcoming Simeon Rose, co-creator of Nature on Board and creative brand director of Faith in Nature.
Hi.
Thank you, Simeon. So please tell us your story.
Sure. Hi, Isabelle. Hi, ChangeNOW and Paris. Thank you for dialing me in from rainy West Wales. It's a lot less glamorous than Paris, but it's nice to be with you. So as you said, I'm creative director at Faith in Nature. For those of you that don't know, we make natural shampoos and soaps and products, and we've been doing that for the last 50 years here in the UK. And in 1974, you know, to be a Polman just touched on this too. You know, to be a green company in 1974 was, compared to today, relatively simple. You know, we were vegan and cruelty-free and natural, and that was right for the time. But these times call for something different. And as you just said, in 2022, we became the first company in the world to legally make nature director of our company. So I know there's a lot of discussion today, and obviously I'm talking to a room full of people who can really make this happen, right? So there's a lot of discussion around governance and the role of boards and what it, you know, and our responsibility to the natural world. But when I joined the board of Faith in Nature, I'm from a creative background, you know, governance and stakeholder theory and that kind of thing. That was not something I was considering at that time. But as I spent more time on this board, I realized something, and I realized that actually it didn't matter what we were being asked. All the decisions we were making impacted nature in some way. You know, whether that's a question on supply chain, on logistics, on formulations, on sourcing, on everything. All these things that I'd never really been asked before. They all impact nature, and yet there's this one voice that's not in the room when we make those decisions. You know, we've got the finance directors, we've got the sustainability directors, we've got the sales directors, marketing directors, everybody. Nature's voice was not in the room. At the same time, I was becoming increasingly interested in the rights of nature movement. And what that does is it legally recognizes nature's inalienable rights. So in giving nature a voice legally, it enables nature's interests to be recognized and acted upon. So I think that the role of the creative in this situation is to connect the dots. And I wondered whether or not there wasn't a way to integrate the rights of nature, the legal rights of nature movement, into the problem that I saw, which was a lack of nature's voice. So I approached Lawyers for Nature here in the UK and Earth Law Centre in the US, who are both nature groups of nature lawyers. And I asked them that question, whether or not there was a way of bringing that that thinking into the boardroom, of creating a new legal framework. And to cut the story short, the answer is yes. We've open sourced the entire legal framework, and that's on the Faith in Nature website, faithinnature.co.uk/a vote for nature. Specifically, what it means is that we've amended our company articles to legally enshrine the rights of nature within them. We've implemented what's called a guardianship model, in which independent voices for the natural world sit in our decision-making processes and deliver their verdict on what is right for nature. And through them, nature is given a voice and a vote.
Thank you so much, Simeon. I think that I was very impressed, and we all have seen, right, the video of April last year. Have you seen it? Mother Nature on the ad. Well, 4.5 million views. It's keep the ball rolling when it comes to appointing Mother Nature in the board, but Simeon Rose has done it for real, and I think it is a true inspiration for all of us. Thank you so much, Simeon, for your testimonial. Thank you.
It's okay. Can I ask one more question?
No, we don't have a question session. We are moving into the next panel. Thank you so much, Miron. Take good care of yourself. Thank you very much for this.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bravo. This is such an inspiration. And I believe that today we have, I think, 9 companies that have appointed Mother Nature in their bylaws. So it's a way to invite, you know, the voice of nature. I will ask the following speakers to also get perspective on this one. So now you are really fully on board, really understanding really the pivotal roles of boards. And we also here, because of ChangeNOW, we are also here to showcase proactive, progressive, net positive boards. So we have decided to invite thoughtful, amazing leaders that will be able to share with us how those boards work, how they really drive the force forward. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to our next round of speakers, Marie-Claire Daveu, the Chief Sustainability and Institutional Affairs of Kering. And as you may know, also recognized as one of the most influential women in the world. So we feel very honored to have you, Marie-Claire, with us today. I also welcome Patricia Torres, who is full of energy and representing also Bloomberg. So as Paul mentioned, critical in shifting the needle. Thank you. And we welcome also BCG as a very knowledgeable leader that have invested also a lot in how can we help the board move the needle and shift purpose into practice. Please welcome Guillaume Charlin. Welcome. Yes. No. Thank you very much for joining us. Maybe as a little introduction, I would love to hear more about all the work that you're doing to really enable everyone in this room to acknowledge really what is happening in the role of boards, why are they so pivotal, and what is really at stake?
Big question. So I'll start by saying, you know, it's been a tipping point for boards for many years, and I would say almost a decade since the Paris Agreement.
A decade.
Since the Paris Agreement, 2015, right? But we are reaching a double tipping point. So, you know, we have not only one problem to solve, which is healing the planet, but we move into now a second problem, which is to regenerate the planet. And the third problem is to actually adapt and create resilience in our business models. Right? Regulation is stepping in big time. CSRD, CES, 3D, ESRS, SEC is stepping into the US. Incentives are kicking in. RARA as a carrot, a stick in Europe with carbon tax. So many things are actually changing. And so boards, more than ever, have their role into stretching the time horizon, thinking through medium to long term, which most of them would acknowledge they are not spending enough time on, to really think how that will reshape businesses, from driving sustainability all the way to adapting and creating resilience in business models.
I know that you don't want to share numbers, but I think that it's also interesting for all of us to acknowledge what is exactly at stake, because we are all conscious here that the board is really accelerating here. But can you maybe share one?
So we did a study with, so BCG and Heidrich Struggles did a study actually every year, and we renewed the study last year. There are a few numbers that are interesting. So 20% of the board members actually think that the current environment will severely impact their business model.
20%?
20%. So you can take that as a good news, but you can also take that as a very alarming news, not realizing what's really going on, because I would argue that 20% is way too low. Right?
Well, let's move maybe to Marie-Claire. What do you think of this number?
So first, good morning, everyone. And to come back on what Polman was saying, I think governance is key when we are speaking about CSR, sustainability. So to react to my friend Guillaume, I think we have to be anxious, because when we think about governance, of course, the most important things to start, because it's also about strategy, to push also the management to have the right action plan beyond the strategy, the first step is to be sure that the board members are aware about the issue and are aware not only about the financial results, but if they want to keep their financial results, they have to be conscious about the most important issue of our century. And it was mentioning climate change, loss of biodiversity, risk scarcity. After, and I come back to you, Guillaume, I think also it's the responsibility of the chairman, of the chairwomen of the board to train its own board member, to educate them, to raise awareness, and also to give them the possibility to see how much their business model is linked with what we call CSR, sustainability. We don't care about the words, but what it's important, it's really to help them to make the links.
How do you make that shift happen? Because we all are conscious that training won't solve it all, probably. So how do you enable the board, and in your experience at Kering, and also in your board's mandate, how do you make the shift happen?
Sorry, I will repeat a little bit what Polman was saying, but the first course, it's a responsibility to have the right board members. And if we look about the profile, and perhaps you have numbers, I don't have this kind of numbers, but the big majority of board members, they have a background on the financial side. And now it's like to be a CEO at the top management. It's really important to have this kind of background on sustainability. So the first thing is to have the right board members and also to have a kind of diversity of board members.
But the reality is that there are not so many executives that have a strong background in sustainability.
But with the young generation, it's also a new step and it's changing. So step by step, you will have this kind of thing. Secondly speaking, we have smart people at board level, so it's the responsibility of the management to train them. Of course, not like when they were at the university, but really to make the link between the business model of the company and what does it mean. If I take the example of Kering, we did last year 4 hours in link with climate change. And it was not only in a theoretical approach, but it was to make the link between, okay, we are producing bags. Bags, it's about leather. Leather, it's about cattle farming. And to give them, I will say, order of magnitude of the greenhouse gas emission, impact on biodiversity. And after, it's also the responsibility of the board to challenge the management. It's also their role to be sure that also the management is take care about that.
But a lot of times I've heard actually that the board members don't feel knowledgeable enough or feel less knowledgeable than the team.
Sometimes also an excuse, because when you don't want to pay attention to something, and don't care, okay, I'm not a specialist. Well, no one is specialist about anything, so it's also to have a big diversity inside the board.
Thank you, Marie-Claire. Patricia, thank you for being with us. We feel very grateful. Have you seen a tipping point in the last couple of years into the pressure that there is on the board in regards to sustainability, and given your role at Bloomberg?
Sure. So Bloomberg is about data. So I'm just going to share. We score more than 50,000 companies on E, S, and G. So to prepare for the panel, I was looking at the numbers for G, for governance, and I was looking in particular into board composition. And then I was trying to understand if there was a link between board composition and climate change. And if the top firms that score really highly on board composition, they were actually more aggressive on implementing policies and strategy to drive that climate change. So I just wanted to share a couple of numbers. I look at the Bloomberg World Index, which is comparable to the MSCI World, and I was looking at all the companies that have reported Scope 1 and 2 emissions. More or less 87% of them have reported. And then I was trying to divide these numbers between quartiles, the top, the second, the third, and the fourth. And basically what I saw was that 71% of the companies that score highly, on the top quartile, 71% of those companies have implemented net zero, versus 52% in the bottom quartile. When I look at science-based targets, 63% of the companies on the top quartile, they have science-based targets, or they are working with SBTi. versus 37% at the bottom. And if I look at the carbon reductions that happened between 2018 and 2022, the top quartile actually have reduced their carbon emissions by 23% versus 1% for the bottom quartile. So it's very clear that board composition makes a big difference in terms of driving and implementing climate change. And this is something that Professor Ludo and other speakers earlier today mentioned, that is that the board composition makes such a big difference. It's not about one board, but actually how the board works together. So I think my tipping point is bring diversity to board compositions, because that diversity actually makes a change.
Thank you so much. Diversity matters. It's all about having the right people, but it's also about making sure that you are moving the needle and you are building an effective board, which is more also of a challenge. Anything that you would like to share around that?
Yes, I think beyond refreshing faces around the table and bringing capabilities, there is something around setting the agenda and allocating time. And Paul was alluding to that. 80% in our study, 80% of board members end up acknowledging that they are trapped into short-termism, looking at compliance, looking at the last quarter, looking at the past, and allocating only 20% of their time looking into the future. Where I would argue that they should do the reverse. Meaning, of course, you need to look a little bit at compliance, but that essentially you can delegate to management. And 60–70% of the time should be invested into thinking through the future. Along the lines of sustainability, regeneration, adaptation, resilience. And that has impact, as we know, profound impact on business models. And it does deserve 60–70% of the time of board members, but that is not done today.
Do you want to react to that?
Perhaps two things. To be sure that also the board is involved, I'm totally in line when we say that all the board members have really to pay attention. When you are in the audit committee, of course, in the remuneration committee, it's obvious. But I think, like inside the company, it's great to have, I will say, one organization, so it can be a sustainability committee, a CSR committee, when board members can dig also the topics, and after they can report to the whole board. So I think it's quite important. After, based on what you said also, it's interesting not only, and of course, to listen NGOs, the bigger audience, but also to listen investors and financial analysts, but on their requests on ESG side, because we know financial analysts more in the classical role, speaking about EBITDA, turnover, and things like that, profitability. But board members are less aware about the fact that between now and 5 years ago, the requests asked by the financial analyst or investor, they are not at all the same. And not in Kering, but in one of my board, we had this exercise, and it was very interesting to see also on the financial analyst side or investor side, how much they want to go into details about sustainability, and it's really based on the environmental side, social side, so for example about living wage, health and safety in our supply chain, and also about the governance. How are we sure that inside the company, sustainability, CSR is really at all the levels inside the company, and not only to say, okay, I will reduce my consumption of water, but to be sure that when I invest, when I do integration, when I do due diligence, for example, I have also sustainability criteria before making the purchase, for example.
Oh, that's a good point, is that we've all seen that shift, and bringing that to the board to really bring back to the board the questions that are raised by the analysts on this is a very good one. And maybe, do you want to react? Have you seen also the different ways that a board can work on a more effective manner on those topics? Because they are, do you go for a sustainability committee to go deep dive into it? Do you have a sustainability expert sitting on your board? Do you have an opinion on what is the best way to operate?
So I'm just going back to using data to help us answer the question. So one of the things that we see is on this board composition, one is diversity. So my first question is, how many board members are young people that they are in the board? 35% of the workforce today are millennials. Do we have those people in the board that understand the trends and how this world is shaping really fast? And let's not forget that we are at a moment in time where AI is becoming really critical. And I'm a big believer that AI could actually drive this green transformation. And if we don't have people in the board that understand ESG and AI, I think we are losing. The second thing is in terms of refreshment. In our studies, we need to have a good balance between 0 to 5, 5 to 10, and more than 10 years at the boards. A lot of the boards today have a lot of board members. They have been there for more than 10 years. Those members, unfortunately, they are no longer independent. They're probably quite linked with the executive team. So we need to ensure there's a good balance, a third of each within that board composition. Mm-hmm. The other one is how many of those board members are truly independent. They actually have views, and they are there to challenge the management team. So that's the role of the board, right? The role of the board is to think about long-term sustainability, like resilience, and actually challenge the management team to say, hey, this is an emerging theme, what are you doing about it? And then the other thing I wanted to say is that, and also Paul mentioned is that the maximum boards that he is today is at 3. And there are so many board members that they feel that, you know, it's like a badge. The more board members I'm a part of, you know. And I feel that it's really important that it's not a badge. Even being a very successful board member at one firm is extremely important because these issues are evolving. You need to invest time in learning, in continuous learning to be an effective board member. So I think he's making sure we have this board composition that takes into account the learning, the investment, independence, the challenging, and the diversity points of view. I think it's really important. So that's a recommendation for better board members, better execution.
Thank you so much. I think that diversity going also in the duration of the mandate is critical.
There's another one that I actually would like to add, which is knowledge. And we talked about knowledge, right? That ESG is a topic, it's complex, it's regulation, there's reputational risks, litigation risks. So it's really important that the knowledge is there for the board members. And when I was speaking with one of my customers, he's a board member, and he basically mentioned to me, the first thing I do when I come to the board is ask, who is the CSO? And if the company does not have a CSO, I'm asking them, just put that in your action list. Hire a chief sustainability officer, because we need one. And I just thought it was so important that if the firm does not have the culture, it has to come from the top, it has to come from the CEO, but sustainability cannot be reporting to the comms, it needs to be part of the strategy. So I thought it was a really important point, is knowledge. Knowledge is as important as that board composition.
So I'm going to ask you a question. On a scale of 1 to 10, how confident are you in the collective ability of the board to move the needle at the speed and scale that we need?
Thank you, Guillaume. No. First, I'm quite confident because, again, when we are speaking about CSR, sustainability, ESG, I think we don't have the choice. And more people, not only at the board level, but also inside the company, they understand that only to continue to do their business. I don't speak about to develop, to grow, but only to continue the business. They need to include 2 examples. When we are speaking about water, most of the businesses need water, and you have a topic with the scarcity of water. Raw materials, things which are coming from biodiversity. Imagine for the food industry until the automotive industry, we need nature, so no choice. So I'm not sure that all the people will be happy. All the people will say it's great to do that, but they won't have the choice. So that's why they will be challenged by their consumer. They will be challenged by the financial analyst. They will be also challenged by regulation, because we are speaking about the CSRD in Europe, but honestly, all over the world, it's changing. So people don't speak in the same manner. Perhaps in some geographical areas, they are less vocal, but in reality, in a risk management approach, you take care about climate. So that's why I think the board will change, and that's why I'm confident. After, but it's true for all our topics, it's a question of scale, and it's a question of speed. And it's where we have really to continue to push, but honestly, between, and I'm sure you have data, Guillaume, but between now and 10 years ago, sustainability is at the agenda of the board. Perhaps it's not perfect, but it's changing very fast.
Thank you. So data, maybe?
No, I think we've come a long way. I mean, a lot of data was shared already. I mean, 95% of boards report on many things, etc. So we've come a long way in the last 10 years. What's giving me hope is, I think, the young generation coming to maturity and now could be invited at the table, right? Bringing those new capabilities around sustainability, but also AI. I think that's critically important.
And what about inviting, like we saw with Simeon on Mother Nature, but you could invite, the future generations on your board. What do you think about it?
No, exactly. That's what I meant.
Yeah,
so the newer generation, yes. Absolutely.
The eyes and having a voice, at the table.
Absolutely, and I think that is starting to happen, right? I think the second one, I'm hopeful. We need role models, right? So we need role models of companies who have actually embarked onto that transformation quite successfully and delivered value for the planet, but also for the shareholders and all of the stakeholders. We miss a bit of those examples at the moment, right?
Who are the ones that you're looking at?
Well, I think we had the epidemic of, with Paul on stage, I could not name any other company than Unilever. But I'd love to name 10, and in different industries and in different geographies, and we still miss that. I think that will come, right? And I'm quite hopeful, when I discuss with large private investors, in private equity, namely, the BlackRock and the Blackstone of these worlds who invest trillions a year. As that was said, they cannot do stock picking anymore. So they have to think, long term. And I do believe that they will be creating role models in the years to come. And I think that will create a lot of aspiration for listed companies who sometimes face more short-termism.
Thank you, Guillaume.
But one word about Mother Nature, because Romain Mouton is in the audience. I saw him a few minutes ago, and I would like to say that under the umbrella of the Cercle of Giverny, we push this idea to have Mother Nature, so it can be in a different manner, but at board level. And I have to say that the first reaction, they had the feeling that we were a little bit disruptive. So it's more to push the idea, but Romain is there. We were pushing that really to say that perhaps it will be also a way to pay attention to nature. Sorry.
No, so I think it's important to just do, I think the board can do it. The question is, will they do it? So would they have the courage?
How confident are you in that? A scale of 1 to 10. Nobody gave a number. Do you realize that?
I think the board will not have a choice.
Okay.
So this is the decade where we really need to show leadership. We have 4.8 trillion that we need to invest from now until 2030 for these new technologies to exist, for the transformation to happen. And as someone mentioned from TNFD in a previous panel, the Mother Nature will exist and will reset. The question is if we're going to be in it or not, right? But Mother Nature and Mother Earth will be there for the future. The question is if we're going to be there in the future or not.
How confident are you in a scale of 1 to 10?
So I think, as I mentioned, I think that we need to have courageous leaders. We need to invest, and we have to be believers. We have to be bold. There's a lot of agents happening in this space. And the only thing that I feel that we really need to nail it more than ever is change of behaviors of people. We're very focused on the environment, we're very focused on the growth, but the change will not happen if the people will not be behind the change. So the question is, how can we bring change through people? And how can we explain to people, educate people from all sides of the society of the benefits of the change, of the benefits of actually leading the change? So I think for me, as board members, it starts from the top. I think employees look up to the boards, look up at the management team to understand if there is consistency of message. So I feel that if you want to lead, like the goalpost is moving quite frequently, The question is, do you want to be a leader or a lagger? Because that's the direction. So you have a choice today to say, do you want to be a leader of a great organization and contribute to that leadership? Or do you want to be part of a company, of a board that is going to be reacting with litigation cases because of lack of action? So be a board and drive change, because it's coming.
Thank you so much. Bravo. Thank you so much. Merci. Merci à vous. Merci. Merci, Maître. Merci. Thank you so much, and I hope that you've seen how much it gives me at least a lot of energy, a lot of hope when I see those role models, because they are role models and the world needs role models. And business can be a force for good. Even though we don't have so many role models, we do have some, and it's very important to capture them, to share the narrative. Now, I'm very eager to welcome on board amazing leaders who are leading organizations when it comes to board members. So, you know, they know what they're talking about because they run organizations that really are driving the change, getting the board on board. So please give a warm welcome to Monica de Virigillis. Chairwoman of Chapter 0, and Denis Terrien, Chairman of IFA, Institut français des administrateurs. Thank you for joining us to conclude this morning of the specific program for board members. Last year, we already had a session on the board, but this time we really invited the 100 international board members, and I hope that this session will be useful to you because they are the one who knows, and they will help us and guide us in this insight. Because, you know, when we are those change makers, as we are in the room, we really want the change to happen fast and far. So we are wondering sometimes, why is it not moving fast enough? So this is the type of question that we have for you. So maybe, Monica, when we ask the question about why board really matters in regard to the transition, can you please share with us some tipping points, some insights that would enable us to really understand the shift that is happening?
So it matters because we entered a social environmental crisis which is existential to our economies and our society. We entered a period of total uncertainty. The only certainty we have is that we will have more instability. So our traditional recipe that is optimizing performance is not applicable anymore because performance optimization works in a very predictable environment. Therefore, we need to move to building resilience, building robustness. And in order to do, and the board is really, this is really the mission of the board, is the mission, so taking care, preserving the long-term value creation is the mission of the board. And the way the board works is not through action, is not an execution engine. It is a chamber to support and to challenge the management in order to execute. Therefore, by the nature of its own operation, the fact to analyze, ask questions, run scenarios, scan opportunities, think through, and Paul said, and Marie-Claire said the same, we need to give time. And I always think, when I also chair my board, I think to Gilles Schnabe, who is the Siemens chairman, he says, before lunch, there is time for performance. After lunch is timing for strategy. And the only choice for a chair is to decide at what time is the lunch.
That's a good one. Maybe, Denis, can you share with us, you are a very active member also at Davos, for instance, and we were discussing when we were preparing the panel, is really the topic of sustainability at the core of the strategy a topic that is shared, that is common language at the board today, or have you seen something shifting in the last months or years?
It was, okay, we talked about Davos. The issue about ESG was very much into the light line 3 to 4 years ago, with people wondering what to do. A couple of years ago, they moved to climate and focusing on climate, which has a plus and a minus. The minus is that you don't look at the whole thing. The plus is that you can actually start to focus and act upon it. And where it is important for the board is, as was said before, board have to look at the long term. And schematically, if you think that a CEO should spend 60% of your time on the short term, let's say 20 to 30% on the medium term, and 10 to 20% of the long term, the board should be the opposite. The board should spend 60% of its time on the long term, 20 to 30 on the midterm, and 10 to 20 on the short term.
And what is
that
the
means
reality?
That lunch would be at 11 o'clock in the morning.
And what is your reaction to what Guillaume just said, which is the data shows that the board is spending only 20% on what is coming next?
No, it said that 20% of the people realize that there are some issues that is coming. However, together with Chapter 0 and other elements, we measure each year the impact on French companies. And the latest study showed that 80% of French companies now have a specific committee that looks at ESG. When 80% of the board have a committee looking at that, it means that it's as important as strategy, nomination, and audit. So that gives us a lot of hope in the future.
I think it was 25% 5 years ago, right?
Exactly. By 2015, it was only 25%, and it rose from 25% to 80%. That means that now ESG is a centerpiece of the governance of companies.
But there is a question about, is this a good or not, a good sign or not? Because the reality is that you go for sustainability strategy, or there was a discussion this morning about should it be the strategy committee? How do you manage that? And what's your perspective on this? Would you recommend this to any board?
Yeah, I think that the structure of the board has to be decided by the board, so there is not a plain solution. I think it's accountability should be clear. There is a piece which is a strategy, which is a piece which is reporting and disclosure. There is a piece which is really financial correlation. So I think there is room, and then there is a piece for remuneration and indexing remuneration on long-term KPIs like climate. By the way, Denis was referring to a joint study with Chapter 0 France and Ethics and Board, and of course IFA, on the indexing of the remuneration on climate change. So more than 50% of
executive
120 companies in France index on a quantitative KPI on remuneration.
But I heard that this was 6% of the total revenue of the executive. And the second point is that the actual results on those objectives were 120.
This is very true. So you say two very true things. So first of all, the weight. Is there a weight which is the ideal one? The study shows that there are by sectors. Energy sector has a 20% weight. In other sectors, it is less. So again, I don't think that there is a solution fitting for all. Of course, more the weight, more if you succeed and over-succeed, you pay. So you need to be attention on the way you put. And in terms of overachievement, the study shows that, yeah, there is a level of overachievement, but we can have a chat on that.
So a question that many change makers is asking us is, what is holding the board back? And we had this session this morning, and maybe you can elaborate also on your experience as the chairman of IFA, but also what you've heard this morning.
First of all, the board should not be held back. If you look at the missions of the board, one is to approve the strategy, and a change is a strategy. The second is to choose the CEO that will be able to deliver that strategy and look at his or her package. And that as well are elements that go directly to the board. And once the CEO will come with major decision as Should I invest in transformation of my factory? Should I get some supplies from nearshore or offshore? Those kind of strategic decisions are taken at the board. So I was rightly said before, the board cannot hide. It has to face reality. What is holding today the board? I think there are a couple of elements. I will not go with what was said before. Some of the people say, we don't know, and therefore we don't address it. I think this is not correct. The first one is diversity. When we look at it, we talk about diversity not only on gender, but also on skills and experience. France was one of the first countries to impose a 40% gender diversity. And what we've seen with that is that it had multiple amazing effects on two fronts. First of all, the average age went down. The average age of board of large companies today in France is 56 years old. You heard Paul was saying 63. The second was that the diversity of people on the board as well changed. 20 years ago, most of the board were made with former CFO or CEOs of company, and today, French board have much more diversity in terms of skills coming from digital, kind of HR, marketing, and also on age. France is the country with the most, where you can find people under 40 that are board of young companies. So just by having one law, which was work on gender, helped on multiple different areas. So this is the first thing. The second thing is being trained. One is not born a board member. It's like being a baker, a plumber, or a banker. A lot of executives that we see at IFA come to us and say, I was the head of this company, the head of business unit of that. I have the head of marketing or an HR, and I want to become a board member. No. Get trained about what you're going to do. You became the head of marketing because you got trained, and after you learned about that tool.
Why is it so different? Maybe you can elaborate, because I'm not sure that everybody in the room understands the difference between being an executive of a business unit or whatever, and the role of board exactly.
Because you counsel people. And this is where, I heard people say, oh, we would need to have a lot of young people on boards. I'm not sure this is actually what we need. If we want to have the voice of young people, then we can have a lot of studies that give us that, right? And that should be brought up by the CEO or other people. We need some experience. So board are here to bring experience. But you can have experience when you're 35 and 40.
What's your opinion on this one?
Yeah, we were discussing about this with Denis before. And I was saying, Karine, allow me this. The first time I read in 2010 the IFA Vademecum, I couldn't understand a word because it was too theoretical. Without having gone through experience in the boardroom, I was not able to figure out how does it work. So I'm thinking that I take myself as the average young at that time person. You have an executive experience and you are used to get things done. And by the way, some of my experience taught me that the least the board understand on the problems, the better it is. So this was my mindset. So you need to practice a bit and then learn. But Denis had a fantastic idea on the Vademecum. This will be a scoop, a future.
Tell us more.
Okay, let's use technology. So at IFA, which gathers about 4,000 board members in France, we publish every couple of years a Bible on what a good board should do, what good board members do. But Monica was telling me, rightly, Denis, it is for people who know what it is all about. So I've just sent a WhatsApp to the CEO of IFA here and say, we're going to put the whole thing on ChatGPT, and we're going to summarize it in 5 pages. And for next year, we'll be able to share it here.
This is a scoop, and thank you, Karen.
But the point goes back to training. The point goes back to be an effective board member, you need to know what you're doing. And my advice to everybody here in the room that say, I want to help a company, I want to become a board member because I have a lot to share. First of all, you have a lot to listen to, because you have to respect the CEO where she wants to bring the company to, and you have to help her be successful. So first of all, listen, understand how the world is going, ensure that you know what value you're going to bring to the board, and get trained on what it is to be. If this is the case, then you're going to be more courageous in your decision. Paul was saying, we need courageous leaders. Yes, this is what we fight for. We fight for board members that are courageous and that take risk in a board. I remember 5 years ago, I was a chairman of a board, and it was a very, very difficult situation. And I was on the line with my shareholders. And I went on the board and I told my wife, I guess I'm going to be fired today at the board. But I think it is important that I stand for the values that I carry. I was elected to be the chairman. I'm going to stand for it. And it was like the movie 12 Angry Men. One by one, as we were talking about the topic, which was how much money we could give back to shareholders, then they understood a different way. At the end of the day, they voted in favor of keeping most of the money in the company, and I was not fired. But I was free. I was free to be able to defend... Independent, to be able to defend what I believed in the values. So in order to do that, you need to know what you're talking about, you need to be trained, and you need to have the energy and the confidence that you can be an active board members. And this is what we're trying to do at IFA, but in other countries, there are also other organizations that can help you.
Thank you. And because we are here in the world's largest event of changemakers, Monica, what gives you hope in the ability of the board to drive this transition? What gives you hope?
What gives me hope is the fact that through the 30 chapter zeros in the world, Chapter Zero France is one of 30 chapters within the Climate Governance Initiative, grouping 100,000 board members around the world on climate and governance, and of course biodiversity as a twin crisis as climate. We are all embarked on an initiative that is intended to make us better, to make us better board member, to learn, to exchange, and the type of dialogue that we are having in our conversation here in France, but also in the other chapters that are Chatham House conversation on very, very specific technical topic as well, the level of the quality of exchange is extreme. So I see people with appetite. I see people, of course, I see the engaged people. I don't see the climate skeptic ones, but they want to understand, they want to exchange. And we said before courage. Hélène Leteneau, who is a good friend of mine, she says, you can be brave, you can be courageous without being born courageous, because when you understand the challenge, when you see other people having succeeded, and when you want to be part of a movement, your acts can be courageous.
Thank you. And maybe one last word, Denis. What gives you hope in this journey of the board moving into the transition?
First of all, I'm a born optimist. But I think that today what we see is a good balance between hard law and soft law, all of them pushing in the same direction. The soft law is, all peer pressure, events like today, and training that we can give, and diversity. All those help people be able to make better decisions. And after, you have the hard law. France passed a new regulation last year, which forces companies to have 30% of its executive as female, by gender diverse, let's call it that way, it's for female, by 2026, and 40% by 2030. That is a hard law. Mm-hmm. Europe just passed a law on CSRD, how to report it. All those laws go in the same direction to entice companies that don't want to move to actually go with it. However, what we don't do enough, and that was shared earlier, we don't talk a lot about companies that do very well. And I think we should also, in the way we do talk about, celebrate the company like Kering that was here, or L'Oréal, that are really pushing forward. And what I'm happy with is that even as a financial investor, you can see that their stock price has increased substantially since they took that decision.
There is a case. There is a case here. So I want to thank you so much for your insights. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you to the amazing partners of our events, IFA, Kering, ChangeNOW, of course, INSEAD, for this morning's session. This is just the beginning, and we'll make sure that every single decision counts, one boardroom out of time. Thank you.